driving his parents up to New York for the burial of one of his father's closest friends. But have no fear, we have Ned Galloway in the house. He is an Albemarle County supervisor, multi-term Albemarle County supervisor, and a man who's been on this show many times, and his insight is always appreciated. So when the program begins, you will see Supervisor Galloway on set, in studio. It's a perfect time to talk with Supervisor Galloway come budget time. A lot of questions in regards to the budget. Of course, we will talk Mr. Neil Williamson's inclusionary zoning commentary from yesterday, which came up on the I Love Seaville show yesterday afternoon. So if you'd like to grab your coffee and sit back and learn about Albemarle County and everything that's happening within the the driver in a lot of ways of this Central Virginia economy, special guest host Ned Galloway will take your questions. We don't mind being challenged. Just has to follow the golden rule mantra that we always put into effect on the show. Viewers and listeners, give the show a like and a share. Lauren and Keswick, hello. James Watson, hello. Mr. DL, hello. Aaron King, hello. Bill McChesney, hello. Counselor Snook, hello. Neil Williamson, hello. Thank you kindly for joining us. We got the newspaper watching the program today and one of the TV stations like we normally do. Ricardo Cruz Duran, hello. Albert Graves and Crozet, hello, my friend, Albert Graves. We appreciate you considerably. Jeff Prilliman, ties to ACPS. Welcome to the broadcast. We will have some fun here in T-minus 20 seconds when the show starts with Ned Galloway. Judah, things are looking quite good on my end. If they're looking good on your end, we can rock and roll, my friend, when you're ready. Good Wednesday morning, guys. My name is Jerry Miller, and thank you kindly for joining us on Real Talk with Keith Smith. It's an absolute pleasure to connect with you through the I Love Seaville network on a show presented by Yes Realty Partners. You can find Yes Realty Partners online at yesrealtypartners.com. We will give some props to another partner that makes this program possible, Interstate Service Company. This is a multi-generation owned business that's right here in Charlottesville, in Albemarle County, in Central Virginia. A home's best friend is Interstate Service Company. A couple of housekeeping items to get out. First, Keith Smith, the namesake of this talk show, is doing the responsibilities of a good son, of a great offspring, if you may. His father had the unfortunate passing of one of his best friends, one of his dad's best friends, and the funeral, in fact, is today in New York. So Keith is currently, after driving up the eastern seaboard with his mom and dad, helping his parents lay to rest a good man, a military veteran, his dad's, one of his dad's best friends. Keith, a chance will be back in studio on Friday. If not, you will see him next week. Keith, our thoughts and prayers, my friend, are with your family, certainly. As I mentioned in our pre-production conversation, Ned Galloway is in the house. This guy is a rock star. He is a multi-time shower or a multi-time participant of the Real Talk with Keith Smith programming, and I think it's time to welcome him to the show. He needs no introduction, but I'm going to ask him to do it anyway. Judah Wickower, if you can go to the studio camera, and then a two-shot and a one-shot, and welcome the supervisor to the program. Ned, it's great to be with you. We're very much looking forward to chatting with you come budget season. Before we get into the nitty-gritty, how about an introduction to the viewers and listeners about you?
Yeah, thank you, Jerry. Good morning. Ned Galloway, I'm Albemarle County Supervisor. Today, filling in for Keith. So again, my thoughts are all with Keith and his family. I know with my father, when his best friends were around, like his close friends, they were uncles to us, me and my sister. So the fact that he's up there, it's not just his dad's best friend, but I'm sure this individual had an impact on the family as well. So all thoughts to them, and Just hope I can fill Keith's seat today. It's a little different animal to be in this chair versus one of the other chairs, but just, I've had to put a sport coat on, and Keith's lucky I didn't have a chance to grow a mustache out. And do they make gray in for hair? I might have to put a little bit more gray in. Sorry, he'll probably watch that. That's a cheap shot. Sorry, Keith. But happy to be here. Look forward to talking about some things, and we'll see where it goes.
Absolutely. And Neil Williamson, hello. We'll talk that inclusionary zoning piece. We promised Sir Neil Williamson at the Free Enterprise Forum. My friend, it's budget season. I'm going to get out of your way. The show is yours. Anywhere you want to go on a very important time of year for Albemarle County.
Yeah, so today, in fact, the supervisors will take action on the budget. We will vote on the what we're going to do with the budget, the advertised tax rates. So where that stands, the county executive brought us a balanced budget with no tax increases. The supervisors, through working through the budget, through our work sessions, did ask for them to come back with some tax increases to pay for some specific things. So what has been advertised that we will then decide if we want to do today or not is an increase in the transient occupancy tax from 8% to 9%, which basically matches what Charlottesville's doing, although that's not the reason for doing it. But when you have a locality that the two are pretty well tied together when we think of tourism, having some consistency there, I think, makes some sense. But we did increase that rate to bring in some additional revenue. The other tax that would be a raise in taxes, the real personal property tax, or what most people pay on their cars. So if back in the pandemic, when the pandemic in 2022, car values spiked significantly. March of 22 was the peak. We're talking 60 to 70% increases in car values, and cars are depreciating assets. They should not be going up in value. But at that time, to give relief, we had reduced the real personal property tax rate from $4.28 per $100 down to $3.42. So it was an 86-cent tax decrease. This year we looked at, so what has been happening over the last few years since we've done that, because we've left that rate alone, car values have started to realign. They have not returned to what they were pre-pandemic values, but in February at least, the last time I read a report on it, cars had came back half of what they had increased. So it was 60, 62, 64% was the peak. You've recovered half of that value in a decrease. And since we did not adjust the rate, you have falling values, and a lower rate means less revenue coming in from that source. So in order to, and I'll talk about what these taxes are going to be programmed for, the advertised rate for that was to go from $3.42 up to $3.96, which is a 54-cent increase. So it's not returning to the old value, but it is returning back to what we were bringing in about revenue-wise back before we reduced the rate. So the rationale there was, all right, let's not just increase the rate back to what it was, let's try to go back in and stabilize or equalize what the revenue is that's coming in based on cars, and then of course machinery and tools tax is there as well. Those are the two big drivers. Now why did the supervisors want to increase and advertise those rates? Primarily it was for public safety issues. We had no room or nothing was brought forward in the county executive's budget to increase fire positions, police positions, and the sheriff did come in and ask for 4.5 positions, and none of those were included in the budget. Adding police, fire, and sheriff positions are not those are an expense. So when we were looking at, and this really came on the heels of when, if you all remember when the different brush fires were all running through the area, that tapped us out. We hit capacity that day. And a lot of times we talk about public safety operations in the big event, like, a plane crash or a hurricane or a tornado or something like that coming through. No, it took a couple of brush fires that thankfully didn't harm life, and the structure damage was not as what it could have been. But we were tapped out and had to declare a local emergency to be able to bring in resources from other jurisdictions, which we did. But the fact is, we cannot afford to not have our capacity stretched, because let's say we had one 2-vehicle accident that day on I-64, who was going to respond to that call? Well, we would have had to pull people off the fires to go do that because we were already at capacity. So the dollars and the revenue that will come in from these particular tax increases will go to pay for one sheriff position for the sheriff's department, 1 additional police officer position for the police department, and then the bulk of it is going to go to helping the North Garden Fire Station, who needs paid staff. They made a request last July. Volunteerism is down, and they're having trouble fielding the calls and dealing with what they're dealing with out there. So this will allow us to get some paid staff out to make sure that we're providing the proper fire services at North Garden. And then this will allow us to man a second full-time ambulance staff at the Seminole Trail off of Berkmar Fire Station as well, which is the busiest, highest call volume station in the entire county. That ambulance, we've got the ambulance, we just don't have the people to man it. And that's $1 million right there, just to man a full-time, 24/7 ambulance team. This is for half-time, half a year, as a way to try to budget it in. It would allow us to do it at the midway of the fiscal year for both North Garden and for Seminole Trail. But that's what it's going to take in order to get those positions on the street. In addition, it's one more Hearts team. Hearts is our team that exists that we put in place a year ago. That is a person from the social services department, a person from emergency services. It could be EMT or it could be fire, and then a police officer that are trained to deal with people in mental health crisis. And we've just in the last three weeks they've been out there doing good work. So the calls for service for the Hearts team, this will allow us to put a second Hearts team on the street, and all of us are in favor of that. And the community is in favor of that. I've yet to have anybody, when I've been out in the public speaking about the Hearts team, go, "Oh, that's a bad idea," or that's not a good approach to community policing. So the increases in revenue that will be brought in by these tax increases are specifically going to those things to pay for those. And that's at the supervisor's request. I emphasize that because not a lot of times, but sometimes folks think, well, is the board just signing off on whatever your county executive or city manager bring you? And in this case, it was no, we felt there were things in this budget that needed to be addressed, and you have to make decisions that if you don't have the revenue, then you have to go get the revenue to do it. So that's where we're at with the budget. We'll see if all the supervisors agree with those advertised tax rates, and we'll take the vote today to put it in place. The kind of X factor is that this will yield about between $2 and $3 million for the schools, which had about a $13 million budget gap on their request. $8 million or so of that is from the state, and they're still on the hook because we don't know what the hell the state's doing with their budget. So once the state figures out their budget, the school division will then know, all right, how much of a gap do they have? Their gap has been decreased by about $2 to $3 million just from the tax changes that we've made if we in fact go ahead and vote for those. So I always tell people to pay attention to us during the budget because you learn what supervisors prioritize and find that are important. There's definitely been discussion by different supervisors and other things that have come up that have not necessarily garnered the support, or maybe not so much, maybe it's not fair to say not the support, but not the commitment of funds in a way that certain supervisors want. But you'd have to go back and revisit all the work sessions to listen in to who was discussing what for that. But I was thrilled. I was pushing for the police position, and that's a priority. Police positions in this county just for traffic safety and all of the cars moving around is important, and we can't be at capacity. So a little long-winded response to the budget, but that's where we're at on the budget and the tax rates.
I appreciate that. So I'm going to ask some questions. You got comments already coming in. Mr. John Blair, I'll get to your comment here in a matter of moments on LinkedIn. Viewers and listeners, if you have comments, put them in the feed. I'll relay them live on air. I follow this fairly closely. Got to know you through this talk show and some of your colleagues. I would think both of those tax increases are going to be approved, especially when it comes to schools. Schools are something that galvanizes generally the community in totality. The budget deficit, Judah, if you can handle that, the $13 million that the schools are behind, not all Albemarle County on the county's shoulders. As you highlighted, the state has a good chunk of that. Once we get some clarity in Richmond, and if we get clarity in Richmond, I would think occupancy, raising that tax to match Charlottesville is a no-brainer. The 54 cents on personal property is going to sting a little bit, and this is where I'll ask my question, and then I'll get to the viewers and listeners. How do the supervisors navigate a tax increase like 54 cents on personal property at a time when everything is more expensive now. Credit card debt at all-time high, assessments at all-time high, and folks are petty pitching in their households.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's a good question and fair question. And any time in the past, now we haven't raised the property tax, the actual property tax, since 2019. And this is probably the first time you have a board of the political makeup that currently exists who decreased a tax back in 22. Values were so high, though, I think it went unnoticed because people's bills still went up even with the rate decrease. But you know,
he's basically talking about during COVID, and he knows this industry better than anyone. During COVID, used car prices spiked out of control. They were increasing in value as opposed to depreciating, and that's when we all felt a sting. So the county did county residents a solid by basically like, look, we see the tea leaves here, let's hold off for now.
Yeah, and that first year was $7 million. So the revenue, if we would have left the rate alone and not did that decrease that year, it was a $7 million item. So we basically said we're going to forego that $7 million in revenue for that budget year. Now, we were also in the midst of the pandemic, and we got very austere in what we did in response, which was the right thing to do. I was pleased with our staff on that. But when I said that the county executive didn't bring these positions forward, you know, the supervisors have to look and go, what is not funded in here? What services are we not provided? And I was reluctant when it first came up for raising the real personal property taxes, the full 54 cents. But I do understand it's almost like an equalization type of thing, meaning that if we had equalized the property tax, there would have been a reduction in tax rate there based on the revenue of the previous year. So the supervisors asked them to go back and find a rationale and try to hone in on what it would take to cover these additional services, and the bulk of which I explained, are these public safety items. And, you know, we had great turnout at our town halls this year for the budget. We also did them a little differently, which I think helped with turnout. And I've been able to talk to constituents in the Rio District about this increase and why we're doing it. Every time that I have explained to folks, forget your political thoughts, forget where you stand on taxes, even the notion of it is difficult when a tax bill goes up. I know that. Every citizen that I have talked to is always open-minded to say, what are you using that increased money for? And when we explain what it is for, now, they may not always still agree, or they may still say, well, that's still painful, or maybe do you need to go that far? So I'm not just saying they just go, oh, great, you're doing a great job. But they're open-minded to understand where the dollars are going. So with the public safety items and why we're doing that, the rationale has been there, where I think folks are understanding of why we need to do this. The fact that property values did not spike as high as they have done the last 2 years helps, because folks are not seeing big jumps there, even though we are realizing still an average 4% increase and getting more revenue from there. In the Rio District, what's interesting, I'd mentioned this before the show, that some of the older neighborhoods are around 0%, even saw some decrease in property values. Your Woodbrook, Carsbrook area, some neighborhoods like that in that area. But townhomes are the ones that seem to really spike. So I was saying that's a call out to the folks in the feed, that somebody could explain to me why attached homes and new townhomes and things like that are seeing increases in values. I just like to understand it. I don't know if that's countywide or just in the Rio District.
I think perhaps those are a little bit more affordable in price, and as there's affordability in price, the attached homes demand is greater, and as the demand is greater, it's driving up price on that type of housing stock.
And it's just doing what the rest of the market is doing.
Right.
So, you know, that's where we're at with that. The schools, getting money over to the schools, they brought in an additional, they saw increases in revenue even before they built their budget based on what we were bringing in before the tax increases. So they still had an additional request of about $5 million. So even if the state still gave them what they had received before, they would have had about a $5.5 million gap in their request to the locality to pick up that $5.5 million. So when you look at it from that perspective, this will also provide them, in the way that we split revenues, new revenues coming in, about it's about $2.5 million that they'll realize to help with their funding issues on their side.
Questions. We'll get to them now. Let's go to LinkedIn and Mr. Blair. He says the Board of Supervisors is making the right move in providing professional staff to North Garden. That geographic area of the county needs greater investment. That area is also growing. So I agree with Mr. Blair there. Mr. Williamson, the property tax revenue has increased, but property tax rate did not. He puts that in the feed. Logan Wells Colelo watching the broadcast, and multiple media outlets watching Supervisor Galloway here on the show. I'll throw the school budget to you. It came up yesterday on the I Love CVille show. $269,400,000 to fund Albemarle County Public Schools. Basically, we'll call it $270 million for an even number right there. It's a great chunk. It's a good chunk. Some folks were asking yesterday how you gauge and balance performance with the schools, with funding for the schools, and increased requests for funding from the schools.
So in Virginia, the lines are pretty black and white.
Mm-hmm.
The supervisors decide what to send over.
Uh-huh.
We do not get into judging on performance or objectives or goals. That's the school board's job. The school board.
You were formerly a
former school board member.
Yep.
It was my job to
Right.
judge how the school division was doing when I was a school board member.
Right.
The funds come over, and then the school division or the school board has to decide how those funds are programmed.
Mm-hmm.
If memory serves, back in 2015 was my last year on the school board. I was the chair at that time. I think we were in the $180, $190 million range. So that gives you an idea of what's happened over the last 10 years. A school division, every school division, anywhere, the biggest expense for a school division is staff. So of your budget, 60%, I think it's around 60% of that's staffing, so salaries, and that's not their benefits. So you add in the benefits, that's another 24%, I believe, is all the benefits of that. So you do that math, you're quick, and I haven't even talked operations yet for all the different school buildings that are out there. So when you think about what the hell, 270 million, what is that going to? The big percentage of that are going to the people that are employed by the school division to do it. And I'm of the mind that those teachers aren't being paid enough. So
That's fair, yeah.
You know, that 270, it's a high number.
Yeah.
But a lot of times when I'm talking to folks, you know, I'm sure there are people out there that feel like teachers are being paid enough, but I don't think that.
Yeah.
And I know a lot of people that don't think that. So if we wanted to even pay them more to be able to keep people retained as teachers, doing a quality job, you know as well as I do, it works in every industry. I just read an article on LinkedIn yesterday that said if you want to retain top quality, high quality people, you got to pay them what they deserve.
Yep.
Right? We're not doing that, and that's a national problem.
Right.
So 270 million, about 220, 230 of that is going to your salaries and going to your benefits, and not, you know, people like to take shots at the admin and central office, and it's top heavy and those salaries are higher. Well, in an organization of that size, you need different people in that place. Now, I'm not going to start nitpicking is this position or that position there. That school board has to do that part. But that's where the bulk of this goes. Your operations run about 11% or 12% of that total amount. So you're quickly honing in on $270 million just to employ the people and then operate the schools based on what you need to open the buildings every day and put it out there. You know, Hanover County School has got 4,000 more students than we have in their pre-K than we have in our whole division. So you could imagine the size of their budget. I'm just, you know, in Albemarle County, we've decided, it's not a written policy, but it's always been an unspoken rule that for every dollar of revenue that comes in, the split is 10% goes to our CIP fund, our capital. And then the remaining, after that, a remaining amount of the total dollar, it'd be about 54% goes to the schools. But after CIP, we give 60% to the schools, 40% goes to local government, and that's how we treat it. I think I always appreciated that stance when I was on the school board because you kind of knew what you were getting. And I appreciate it as a supervisor now that it's going over to them because I'm like, all right, these tax rate increases that we have programmed in, that's how that $2 to $3 million is going over there. And we're justifying it based on what it took to cover some local government side and then also justifying getting them about halfway through that new request that they made.
Okay, I'll throw this to you. Follow up on the schools, and then we'll get to more comments coming in. Do we anticipate, or is it a fair read, as collective bargaining becomes even more of a reality with our schools at Albemarle County, that number is going to increase even more with Albemarle County school funding? And how do we plan, because I believe that will be the case, it just seems logical, how do we plan with collective bargaining and teachers, basically staff of ACPS getting more compensation, better benefits? How do we budget or plan for that additional overhead that's on the horizon?
Yeah, I mean, the school board will have to figure that out. Are they
Okay.
going to go all in? Are they, it's a collective bargaining is an interesting thing because you're basically setting up now a negotiation, across the table from two different groups.
Yep.
And you better be a good negotiator because, it's not just a foregone conclusion that you win collective bargaining and that you're going to start winning things. You have to go through the process. I think the school division's at the point where they've just agreed on the process. They haven't even got to the discussions yet.
Right.
So I'll be curious to see what the teachers and the teacher group, what their asks will be, what they bargain for, and how the school division responds to it. But if any lessons are learned from Charlottesville going through their collective bargaining agreements, yes, it increased costs because folks are getting paid more. And if I remember right, I remember reading an article from I think it was a bus driver in the city of Charlottesville that said, "This is a game changer for my life."
It was about 75,000, I think the number was used in that article compensation-wise. He says this is life-changing. You're exactly right, Ned. Exactly right.
That's a good thing. I've never been asked the question of where I've stood on collective bargaining. I have stated publicly when I've run for some other things in this state where I'm at on it. I'm a fan of it. I'm not opposed to it. But the idea is that it is a process, and if you've got an contentious relationship already with the folks who are wanting collective bargaining, then your collective bargaining is probably going to be contentious. If you're doing right by employees as an employer to begin with, then collective bargaining shouldn't make either side that nervous. It's just putting things down on paper so you know what to count on. And a lot of times in collective bargaining agreements, it's beyond the salary. It's some other things that are in there that can really help with quality of work life. So that's why I'll be curious to see what the teachers' asks really are.
Great insight there. I was torn on collective bargaining when it came to Albemarle County Public Schools, but in the end, I was in favor for collective bargaining with ACPS because there's this imaginary line that separates Albemarle and Charlottesville. And as the Charlottesville teachers and Charlottesville public school staff got more influence and power through essentially unionization, my fear was, as a parent of two young boys, that we would see talent go over this invisible line to Charlottesville, and that's the last thing we want because that would cause the watering down of ACPS. So that led me to support collective bargaining. A lot we got to get to on today's program. Before I get to these comments, I want to make sure we have an opportunity to get the items out of your notebook here. You wanted to highlight the ACPS facility that was coming online. Was it in the old J.C. Penney spot?
Yeah. So that's awesome. We've got it. It's open. Supervisors got a little tour. We got to walk through it the other day.
Nice.
I happened to see before. I got a tour from the property owner before he did anything with it, and see what was. The racks. There were still racks in there. The old salon stuff was still in there. Great property owner. Wonderful individual to have in our community. So I'm thrilled that he owns. I wish he would have got the whole property, frankly. But going through there, what's crazy is the inefficiencies that are found by putting this Public Safety Operations Center in that facility. And for folks that don't know really anything about it, the bulk of it is taking the technicians and the folks that work on our emergency vehicles. It's a shop. It's a shop for the fire engines and for the police cars and for things like that. Prior to that, these technicians had to be mobile and things were stored at different stations, and there was reduced room for the police department over on 5th Street. So this allowed us to find one centralized location to bring all operations under one roof. It allowed us to bring evidence storage out of the other location, put it there. Same for vehicles, because vehicles can be evidence. And you have these technicians now with all their parts in one place. And we're not relying on as much vendors to have to send work out to because we can do it in-house. That saves time, that saves money. So huge efficiencies being found by having this all in one place. In addition, there are some other police operations now that are functioning out of there really because of space. They found they have some space there to allow those to move from Fifth Street over to the Public Safety Operations Center. So I'm thrilled. It's in the Rio District. I love having a more regular police presence there now, which there will be. If you're driving back behind the mall, be careful. There's a new stop sign as you're passing where the entrance is. So if you're looping around the south end of Fashion Square, it'd be a bad place to run a stop sign. I'm just saying. There's some folks out there. But wonderful add to the community, great efficiencies. That's going to help us in the long term because now our resources are going to be better expended, which I've already talked about the need for that. So we're finding some savings in-house by putting this operation under one roof.
Supervisor Rutherford from Nelson County, thank you for watching the program. Rob Neal, thank you for watching the show. Kyle Irvin, Max Edelson, Ray Cadell, thank you for watching the program. Viewers and listeners, let us know your commentary. I'm going to pass along Linda Harrell, friend of the program, her comment. I know Supervisor Galloway's answer is going to be, look, it's the school board is making the decisions on school-related topics. But she lives in Ivy in Albemarle County. She is a taxpayer and a homeowner. She passes along this. Why do the supervisors continue to support a school system that has watched reading scores plummet over the past decade for all students, not just children of color? Why doesn't someone hold the central office accountable for their failures? The school board does not hold them accountable. Why does not the Board of Supervisors do something? And then she said, ask Supervisor Galloway what the school board did to address the falling scores when he was on the school board during his time.
I'd have to go back. I mean, it's a great question, Linda, but you're testing my memory now from 2011 to 15, what the reading scores did over those 4 years. I had a very different mentality, I think, back then, relative especially to standardized testing. I was not a fan, and I said so much. I think standardized testing is loaded with problems, and I'll leave it at that in terms of what that tells you or what that informs you about the school division. And I'd have to go back not just on reading scores. I remember back then the percentage that we were focused on were the declining scoring and the performance of minority children in our school division. And that was a big focus back then. I don't recall reading being the focus. And maybe, Linda, honestly, maybe that's part of it. Maybe our focus was on something different and it wasn't specific to the reading element. I know that the school division has decided they're implementing, because I know they're going through professional development for new reading approaches and responding to that for the next year. And I have to have faith in the members that the county has elected to that board to hold the school division accountable and make their decisions accordingly. I can tell you that based on some of the new members that are on that board, that in my own time, I tend to go in and listen and sit in and watch sometimes during budget season. And, you know, it's always fun when new people come onto a board. Because they're new, they start asking questions that are really good questions to ask whether you're on the board for a month or whether you've been on there for 20 years.
Okay.
So I think the questions that some of the new folks are bringing on, and since there's more than one new member, I think there's a confidence there where you don't get a little intimidated by the other folks that have been serving. So I think good, at least in the few examples that I've set in on, there are really good questions being asked of staff, which is what the board has to do to decide if they're performing at the levels that they wish to be. And that's what I can ask and require of our school board. I really cannot do much more than that. In the state of Virginia, for the funding piece, we send the money over. We send it over as a lump sum. The Code of Virginia does allow supervisors to send it over in categories. And even then, you're still limited. It's not that I can say, here, I'm going to give you an extra $1 million and you need to use that for reading interventions. We can't do that. That's not allowed. We can send $1 million over and hope and wish and say what we would like them to use it for, but ultimately the school board has to decide what that money goes to. If you send it over in the categories by the state, what that means is the Board of Supervisors could say, all right, we're going to send them $100 million, and 20 of that will be for transportation, 50 of it will be for instruction. So there's some categories that you could send it over in dollars. I'm not aware in Virginia how many places do it that way versus not. I've just never looked into it. But I understand that it's a way sometimes for supervisors to try to influence it. But look, they're an elected body. Elections matter. You know, when I ran for school board folks that did not have kids in the schools would say, well, I'm not that engaged with it. How do I know if you're going to be a good school board member? And I'm like, look, 60% of every tax dollar you spend is
Exactly.
going to that division. You probably should know how I'm going to spend it.
100%.
So that's important. It's not that I'm not concerned. I still have 2 kids in the school division.
Right.
I'm concerned about the same concerns. And as a parent and as a resident, I'll ask my school board member those questions and put them and do my job as a voter and a resident to do that. But as a supervisor, I do try to respect the boundary of other boards, not just in our own county, but in other jurisdictions, of going, all right, that's their side of the fence, that's their world, they have to be responsible for it. Happy to give commentary, I guess, as an individual, but right now as a supervisor, I guess that's my response.
I thought that was a fantastic answer, and I have a follow-up for you. He mentions the new school board members, Charles Pace, for example,
For
Allison
Ryo.
Spillman, for example, the at-large representative, Rebecca Berlin, again, in the Whitehall. And I love following this. I'm a local news junkie, just like yourself. And I have also seen fresh questions being asked by these fresh representatives on the school board.
That's great.
What did you make and what do you make of how politics in the county have either evolved or progressed? The at-large race with Spillman and Dr. Meg Bryce gained national attention and had funding that was at levels that were, some would call obscene, some would call the new world of politics that we live in. I believe both over $300,000 individually in funding dollars for a school board race. I'll throw an open-ended question to you, then we'll go inclusionary zoning, and you're crushing this here. You always do. What are you making of how politics are evolving in the county we both live, all 3 of us live in?
Well, I almost in many ways think it did a disservice to those 2 candidates. They got pulled into something that was bigger than the local issue of Albemarle County School Division. And, Miss Bryce and her family relationships, and then political powers that be, and money getting thrown around for reasons that was all that money being spent really about reading intervention? Probably not. It was.
I would say definitely not.
It was political turf.
Yeah. For both candidates.
Right.
Yeah.
And both of those candidates probably, and I don't know their motives behind it. I don't know either of them very well, but how often were they dealing with those types of questions versus actual mechanics of day in, day out school operations? Back in 2000, what would it have been? 11?
How much did you raise in 2011?
Oh, 20 grand.
Yeah.
For the at-large seat. And my opponent, who was the chair of the Republican Party that year, she raised, I think, 12 or 13. And there was actually a third person that might have raised a couple $100. So you're talking total, 30-some grand? But what's interesting is back then...
Versus $600,000 for the same race in 2024, or 2023.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
But back then, the last time we had supervisor races where individuals were raising, the expectation was 120 grand. You go back to when Rodney Thomas, Dwayne Snow, and Ken Boyd ran as a collective ticket, and all of those supervisors were raising 100 grand or more to compete for that seat. And in 2011 dollars, that was a big deal.
Mm-hmm.
So when I was running for supervisor in 17, I was like, oh man, I'm going to have to raise 100 grand if it's a competitive race. Because that was kind of the norm of what you would need to do. So it's happened before, but I like to say, okay, now that all that money was spent, $600,000, if that's I trust you that that's the number. Now one of those individuals is elected, and the attention and the energy that was behind that dollar race, is it still being focused on that individual in the school division and what they're doing? For better or worse, I don't really know the answer to that question. I'm sure some are. But campaigns have this funny thing of happening and getting people swirled up because of the political nature of it. And then in Virginia, you quickly move on to the next campaign. So, they moved, after that race, they would have moved to, this year, and it's a presidential race. And now all those political ops are getting geared up for congressional races and the presidential race, and then the following year it'll be government. So the tides turn from, there is a difference between the politics of campaigning and then the act and the actions of government. And that's why, campaign events, I had 21 people show up to my town hall on the budget this year. I bet if I was campaigning and it was a competitive race and there was $600,000 on the table, if I held a political event, I would have probably had, what, 5, 6, 7 times that people? I could have
Easily.
done?
Yeah, if not more.
Yeah.
And it would have been on both sides of the aisle.
Right. Now, once you're elected, those folks, I'll give, I do expect, and I'll steal this from Tony O'Brien in Fluvanna County. He said, look, sometimes people don't show. Not necessarily because they're disengaged, but they put you there to do a job, and they're expecting you doing your damn job.
Yeah.
And I love that Tony pointed that out, because I
Yeah.
think that's spot on in a lot of ways. It's okay, maybe they're not disengaged, but hey, Galloway, we voted you in. We're expecting you to do a good job. We're not always going to agree with you. We're not always going to be happy with the decisions, but we're also expecting you not just to fluff it, and not to go in and not take it seriously.
Sarah Williams, watching on YouTube, she says, you have to think COVID virtual learning took 2 years of classroom learning from these children, and the teachers are having to play catch up to get them caught up to grade level. So she highlights that point as perhaps why some performance levels have struggled. It's where he's
Spot on, by the way.
I think that's spot on 100%. I want to cover some other topics with Supervisor Galloway on today's program. This is one that it's coming up on the feed. We anticipated this coming up. The politics, and you are a true professional with representing Albemarle County. You've done it at the school board level. You've done it at the supervisor level. I've said all the time, many times on this program, that you have state senator, you have delegate written all over you, and your upside is significant in the Commonwealth. What's going on with politics at the local level and how it's quickly going into national or geopolitical level? In Charlottesville, they had a ceasefire resolution, the city councilors, that was rammed down their throat by taxpayers. And a vote changed on this ceasefire with Israel and Palestine and Gaza and Hamas. Initially, the councilors said, we're Charlottesville, we're local. What are we talking about this for? And then second time, after some in-person bullying at a council meeting, the vote changed, and then the resolution for ceasefire was approved by councilors in Charlottesville. Mm-hmm. Louisa County, we talked about this yesterday. The Board of Supervisors are not allocating $6,000 to Piedmont Virginia Community College because of this Palestine, Israel, Gaza, Hamas mess, this war. And Louisa's saying, we don't appreciate what Piedmont's doing, allowing this, a movie to be aired on campus. Mm-hmm. So we're going to hold this money basically in escrow, or terrible pun, in hostage, until we get a response from Piedmont about what they're going to do moving forward. So I guess I'll throw an open-ended question to you. Are we now at the point where folks at the supervisor level, even the school board level, are having to pontificate or offer perspective on national and world politics? And is that necessarily a good thing for our community?
The discipline, I think, that needs to be there, and it's very difficult. These are emotional issues. They're important to people. And when you take something that's both important to you and emotional, then things really can heighten and flare up in a hurry. And it's happened before. It's happened before in Charlottesville. It's happened in Albemarle County on issues where things have come to us trying to have us take official board actions on things that go outside of Albemarle County, whether it's statewide or national, or even something that's not even necessarily a national or a state political piece. It's one thing for the board. So I can run as an individual to be elected to something. And who I am and the quality of my character and what I think and believe, I think is all good information for folks when they have to decide if they're voting for me or not. But once you're a member of a board, your individuality ceases in a lot of ways. You have a voice, you get votes, but the actions are the collective will of a board, and that represents your local jurisdiction. So actions, I believe, should be restricted to the business and the fiduciary responsibility of the board. And that's local actions. That's budget, that's hiring the folks that the board's responsible for hiring, that's passing ordinances and policies that are specific to the local level. It's one of the reasons why I love local politics, because even though local government can be slow, you get more immediate reaction to things on the local level than you can at the state or the national level. Now, in terms of what other boards decide to do with their boards and councils, I have to let them decide on that. If folks want to have a time or a place for me to have a conversation about what I individually believe outside of my role of supervisor so they can judge me in a different way, I'm happy to do that. I don't know that I want to go there just filling in for Keith. Maybe I need to be a guest on a show as an individual at that point to go into conversations that could be emotional and like I said, that are important to people.
And we're happy to host you on that.
And, that's fine with me. I mean, there was one time when I was on the school board, I learned this lesson from a person on a door. And he caught me off guard. He was a little unhappy that I was knocking on the door, but then when he learned I was running for office, he eased up a bit. But he asked my stance on abortion when I was running for the school board. And I thought, buddy, I'm running for the school board. I'm never making a decision on this. And then he looked me in the eye and he said, listen, I know how this works. Folks like you run for the school board. Then the next thing you know, you run for this office. And then you run for a higher office. Next thing I know, you might be my governor. I want to know where you're at on this issue in case that's a possibility. And I went, okay, understood. This is a judgment call that he wants to make on me, somebody that's putting myself out there to run. So we got in and had that conversation and chatted with him about it. And I'm on the record on these things. I've run for other things, so there's not a lot I haven't been on the record on. So it's okay for me in one avenue for folks to want to talk to Ned about that and understand who Ned is, where he stands on things, what he thinks about things. And there's a lot of difficult topics that I've had those conversations about outside of my role as supervisor. As a supervisor, I try to maintain the discipline of speaking officially about things that are actions that Albemarle County Board of Supervisors should and take relative to our local responsibilities.
And I appreciate that. I think it should be that way.
And I have made comments and statements before that go outside of that, but I try not to do it in the realm where it sounds like I'm speaking for the board.
And you often caveat it by saying this is Ned Galloway talking, not Supervisor Ned Galloway talking.
That's right. So, these issues are hot, man. I mean,
should the council, it's a tough question here. And
I can't decide if the council should have or shouldn't have done that.
That was my question.
Those 5 members have to make that call.
Fair.
And they went through an experience. And I can tell you, and I learned this lesson as a school board member, because kids are involved. When emotions run high, and your kids are involved, as a politician, it's hard to not be responsive to that. What you decide to do, I think, does speak to who you are as an elected official. And whether, again, it's just like, nobody wants to raise taxes, nobody wants their taxes raised, but you have to make that decision sometimes. And that's your official responsibility to make that call. And, I've had to tell people I'm not going to answer that in the realm of the supervisor, not do this, and answer for it. And sometimes the issue, based on my political party, is I get grief from the opposite party sometimes, and sometimes more often than not, get grief from my own party on that. So it's not even really a political party thing. If you're not, people want to know these things. And I think there's just a different place than me at the dais of the Board of Supervisors speaking to those. I'm happy at a political event or in that situation that I'll more than happy to have direct conversations with folks about how I think and feel. But the dais of the Board of Supervisors is not, in my opinion, the pulpit for that, because I'm there as an individual to do the collective will of that board.
That's a fantastic answer. I 1,000% love that answer right there. And taxpayers and Albemarle County residents agreeing with you. For example, Vanessa Parkhill in Earlysville, thank you, Supervisor Galloway, for focusing on the business of running Albemarle County, exclamation point from her. 1,000% agree with her. We covered that topic. There's a lot of other things I want to cover here at the 11:05 marker, and we're mindful of Supervisor Galloway's time here.
Oh, wow. It does go quick.
You're killing this, dude. You're killing this. The Neil Williamson inclusionary zoning commentary from the Free Enterprise Forum. We talked about this yesterday on the I Love CVille show. He highlights and he references a number of, in fact, I should call it up. The gist of what Mr. Williamson, who I believe is watching the program, he's actually on baby duty right now with his daughter Jill expecting their child, and Mr. Williamson is about to be a grandpappy here. So we want to give some congratulations to Grandpappy Neil Williamson, the president of the Free Enterprise Forum. Neil highlights a recent report from the UC Berkeley's Turner Center for Housing Innovation, authored by Shane Phillips of UCLA's Lewis Center for Regional Policy Studies. The gist of Mr. Williamson's commentary is inclusionary zoning when government gets involved in housing and ties it to area median income or affordability, a certain percentage of housing stock from developers earmarked for affordability or area median income levels. These reports and his commentary says will actually do the opposite of what inclusionary zoning is intended to do, which is create more housing that is affordable. Instead, it will backfire and create less housing stock. Open-ended for you on that topic.
Yeah, first off, at 11:03, this topic is a great one for a Ned and Neil program at some point. Just this topic could be an hour-long conversation.
100%.
Unpacking the article that he cites, I've only had the opportunity to read through it once. There's a lot in there, and with time in mind, my response would be, Neil's not wrong. Inclusionary zoning can decrease the overall production of that. In fact, a local developer, I won't call them out because I didn't get permission to use it, but this tool, inclusionary housing or inclusionary zoning from the National Multifamily Housing Council. So, and like Neil, the article he's citing, these are people coming from the housing industry. So these are not people like attacking this stuff. It's folks trying to get the housing and trying to analyze what do you need to do to make it happen. But they arrive at the same type of piece that, inclusionary policies, if it's not done properly, can ultimately have unintended consequences that you don't wish to have as a locality. So I get that. I think Neil's bigger point, which he is often, okay, Neil, I'm putting words in your mouth, that he often cites, and I appreciate, is are the policymakers doing the right or proper or proficient, maybe is the best word, cost-benefit analysis of the policies that they're going to put in place so they understand what those unintended consequences could be and then make decisions accordingly. So, for example, like part of what Neil shared in his article out in the Los Angeles area was dealing with ELIs, or extremely low-income units. Now, these are 30% AMI units. So, of course, the impact is going to be greater because you're going from maybe 80% policy down to 30, and that's a huge change in income and financing sources for a project. Just going from 80 to 60 in Albemarle and from the 15 to 20, not as extreme, and it's created the same kind of concerns, like this is going to shut down housing production. So, to get to an apples to apples comparison, like I want to go back and get into that article and understand, all right, what are the analytics that this guy got into, the author of the article, and apply that to the Charlottesville-Albemarle region or the entire region to understand more that if we do inclusionary zoning and we subsidize a house, what's the unintended cost, or intended cost, if you will, of getting that affordable housing unit online. Knowing full well that, yeah, we're moving from 80% AMI to 60, from 15% to 20 now that our incentives package is in place. And all of these articles that speak to this issue say that the incentive has to match the change in financing sourcing for these units, especially rentals, or else it doesn't work. And if you don't do that, then you could cease production because folks just won't do the project. And if it's not voluntary, then you get nothing done. If it's voluntary, then a developer could look at it and go, okay, it works, I'll do it. It doesn't work, I'll do what my other option is, and we can at least bring more options online. The article, though, also stated that you do get more affordable units through these programs. It just means less units overall, and I think that's the lesson we have to be mindful of. If I'm getting less units overall, and the less market rate units are increasing to subsidize those lower units, and there's no public subsidy coming, it's all being done in the private world, then you're seeing while you're keeping affordable units online at a lower rate, you're going to skyrocket the other ones. So I get that, and I think that's Neil's bigger point, making sure that we understand that. But like it was also a transient-oriented communities that this guy was talking about. So they already have a voluntary zoning piece that includes density bonuses in these transit-oriented communities out there. And it sounds like that's actually working. It's a voluntary piece. So it's like, okay, I want to understand that a little bit more. But I think Neil's correct in knowing, I don't know that when I say I don't think we know, I'm talking Ned doesn't know the analytics that are behind this article to our region. And we probably need to do, like Keith often talks about, doing a return on investment analysis or an economic impact analysis of the housing market.
Similar to the economic impact analysis that was done on the defense sector.
Correct.
Which found it had a 1.2 billion with a B impact on the region. And that was financed. This analysis was underwritten, is a better word, by the Chamber, the City of Charlottesville, and Albemarle County. And that analysis proved to be, wow, it's even larger than we anticipated. Keith has alluded he thinks the economic impact from real estate could have, perhaps not at the 1.2 billion level, but a very high, a much higher
That's right.
level that's anticipated.
And if that's the case, and you understand the importance of that, then what does that mean to your policies on housing,
Right.
whether it's affordable housing, inclusionary zoning, what have you? The folks here talk about the recommendations, the National Multifamily Council, and they say provide sufficient incentives, right? This is talking about if you put in an effective inclusionary policy, here's the 4-tiered things that we suggest that you need to do. Provide sufficient incentives, target strong markets, offer flexibility, keep it simple. So when we pass the developer incentives in Albemarle, there's debate right now, I think, about whether or not the incentive is sufficient, which is fair. The flexibility is the piece where I'm saying to developers, we didn't hardline it. We put the flexibility in there, and a lot of other incentive tools are there. Now we have to talk project specifics, just like you do in an economic development project, to understand if the project's viable or not, to give us the affordability and give you a project that makes sense to move forward on. Target strong markets. We're in a strong
100%.
strong market.
Yeah.
Keep it simple. All of the recommendations that I read in this particular article about keeping it simple, we asked staff about how they're going to do it, and I think we're achieving that. So I think we're going along the lines of it. But to look over here at the article that Neil has, and Neil's going to be more expert on this stuff than I am, to understand when you take a below market rate, they use the term below market rate unit versus market rate unit. Of course, no matter what you do, if you move it from 100% AMI to 80%, or you increase the percentage of units from market rate units totally, you are going to decrease total supply, I suppose. In our market, what that ratio is something I can't answer. Like if somebody said, all right, you're moving to 20% total units at 60% AMI, what is the offset or the cost benefit analysis compared to the market rate units? And I have to sit here and say, I don't know the answer to that, and I need to know the answer to that. This incentive plan's now in place, and the board is committed to it being a flexible one where, if it's not working or it's doing the opposite or if it's impeding what we're trying to do, we're going to fix it. But we're out of the gate now, and we need some examples to be able to move forward. We've had some positive developers talk about specific projects, right? I get it now that they fully understand it, and I'll be excited to see if they're going to be able to bring projects forward to meet it. And I think if we can get a couple of conversations going like that and add in some more data analysis as we go, I think we're going to get at a place where, while Neil's overall point of perhaps lowered units overall, but it will at least understand the cost and say, well, that's important in order to provide these affordable units. And you'll have an elected body say, well, where's the line that we're not willing to cross? That's too much of a cost to be able to provide.
What is I'll follow up for me, and Neil does his famous hashtag, more housing everywhere for everyone, and shares the link on the comment section of my personal Facebook page of the commentary that we're talking about. I thought it was very well written. Neil, back-to-back days, you've shaped the content that we're creating on this network. I'll throw this to you. I'm a businessman, I'm a real estate guy, real estate investor. Why not just go the road of developer, contribute financially to this affordable housing or inclusionary zoning fund? Say, this project, whatever the project is, has tiers or thresholds, money out of our pocket to this fund, and allow the developer to do the project as they see fit. What's wrong with that approach?
Well, then the county, if every developer did that, then where are the new affordable units going to come from?
Okay.
And somebody may know the answer to that. I don't know the answer to that. If I had every developer bring forward a project and they paid off to a fund, it could help us, housing choice voucher programs and other things that we could use. We could send money to offset grants for when nonprofits bring us projects. So we need, that money would go to a fund like that in order to help with that. Maybe over time, it allows us to eventually buy property and do the land bank just in similar ways we did with Rivanna Futures for economic development purposes. It would take a long time to build that up or to help with the CIP to get a lot of those funds in. We don't have a whole lot of places to develop left in the development area to get the density we need. So if we allowed the remaining truly, clean properties that have yet to be developed, develop out and not have some sort of standard to bring those affordable units online, how do we get those new affordable units would be my concern as a policymaker. And I don't know the answer for home ownership. I'm speaking specifically about rental. I mean, I do know the answer about home ownership, but I'm speaking specifically right now about those rental units. It's just Keith often says it, right? It's a silver buckshot. It's not a silver bullet. There are so many different things that we have to do, and the cash in lieu is an option that has been put out there, but I would rather figure out a way where if I can incentivize and help get the financing burden gap closed to get the affordable units online for the new places, because we're targeting density in specific spots and there's only but so many opportunities to do that, and get those affordable units online so that I don't have to gamble with whether or not we get those new units, that's where I'm at as a policymaker.
Okay. I got a couple of items that I want to get out of my notebook here. You mentioned expanding the developmental area. I've been in this community for 24 years, and for the first time in 24 years, I've seen folks that have sat on the Board of Supervisors dais legitimately consider expanding the developmental area. This came up at a recent meeting. I was watching, a number of others were watching, and it was, Mr. Pruitt, I believe yourself. There's 4 of you guys that kind of gave indication to expanding this early stage.
To be fair, it's and Neil, if he's still listening,
Yes.
he is the one that phrased it this way. The Albemarle supervisors discussed having a discussion about expanding the development area. And even that, and he quoted me saying that the expansion of the development area is the third rail of Albemarle politics, and it is. It's a tried and true approach to have 5% set aside for development area and 95% set aside for rural area. No supervisor, myself included, were advocating expansion of the development area. But
I believe Supervisor Pruitt, and I don't want to speak for him, but Supervisor Pruitt would be very much in favor of expanding the development
I think
area.
even he had some brakes pumped on fully going there.
Okay.
But look, at some point, if you're going to have an approach where you say you're going to put all the density in the development in one spot, growth isn't going to stop. Growth is going to continue, population growth. And at some point where you've targeted, it has to hit capacity. And it just depends on, well, what does that mean? And that was my point of bringing it up. We have to start having discussions. Some of those discussions, folks get nervous because they were saying, well, let's identify areas where the expansion would occur, and then there are concerns about having that conversation. Just even wanting to expand it can put people into a tailspin. But at the end of the day, we have to say, all right, the 5% that we've identified, do we truly know where we're at from a capacity standpoint? And do we truly know what we could, if we ever said in public, the development area has met capacity, how do we answer that question? I don't know the answer to that, because a lot of times I've sat here and said it myself. It could be 20 years down the road. It could be 50 years down the road. All right, well, we need to identify and say what that target is. The Rio Small Area Plan, for example, if all of those 4 quadrants rebuilt and redeveloped under the Rio Small Area Plan, huge density increases would come to that area. I mean, big time. Even just one of the quadrants, it would do that. So there's capacity in the development area for a lot of things. It's not just new development. It may have to be redevelopment. And Neil talks about that, allowing residential and commercial, or allowing more elements like that to happen that could bring on units. So my advocacy that day and having that conversation is that, yes, we should still be talking about how to have this conversation as part of the comp plan. And whether it's a tough conversation or where you stand on the matter, just from a proper responsible planning approach, we need to start setting some benchmarks to say, is this, so that we can say it might be 20 years or 30 years with a little bit more certainty, what is the goal line for hitting capacity? And I don't know the answer to that, and I think it's worth knowing that. I think 20 years ago or 10 years ago, I wouldn't have said that because it just felt like it was so far off. But things are, some of those final places in the development area are getting moved up, so it's time to start looking to redevelopment. And we need to know what it is, or else we can't plan for it.
Your fans and supporters are giving you some props. For example, Lisa Costello is saying, "Hey, Ned," with multiple exclamation points. Some of your colleagues on the board watching the program and other boards as well from other jurisdictions. We'll close with this. You carried the show. The show went even better than expected, and I had high expectations for the program. Any one-hitters or potential updates on Rivanna Futures? Former board chairwoman Donna Price highlighted this was the greatest economic stimulus or driver in Albemarle County history, what you guys are doing with the purchase from Wendell Wood at Rivanna Futures to build essentially, I've called a defense contractor, I've dubbed it a spy epicenter in northern Albemarle County. Mm-hmm. She called it the greatest economic impact for Albemarle County, saved the University of Virginia.
Well, it put Albemarle County, we've come a long way in our economic development efforts since 2015-16, because back then there wasn't even really any plans for economic development. Just starting to figure out that we should have an economic development strategy, we should have a team, we should have staff committed to this, and all of that has happened. And, with the comment of government can move slow, moving from where we were at just 8 years ago to where we're at now with economic development has been light speed in the government world. And I think that's going to be a huge impact on the economics and the local economy. And down the road, as that starts to come online, this is the type of thing that starts to not put as big of a burden on property taxes, because you start getting revenue through other ways. And we're at 68% of our revenues coming from folks' houses, from land taxes. And to get that percentage down, you need to find the revenue somewhere else. And this is the type of project that's going to eventually lead to that, so that you don't necessarily always have to turn to the property tax as your biggest key to move a revenue, or the real personal property tax in people's cars. So I'm excited for what it is. I'm proud of the team and the staff. Economic development has been one of my 3 biggies when I've run, my 3 priorities, and that's one of them. So always keep my eye on what we're doing. And the caution is making sure that even though we have this big one, that we have to remember there's a lot else going on economic development in Albemarle County that we have to make sure we keep our eyes on and not allow that one project to suck all the oxygen out of the room.
Last one here, and multiple people are saying, please bring this guy back. Are you having fun?
I'm having a great time. Love coming on the show.
Yeah,
I just hope I did well by Keith. He's going to watch this and have to critique me.
No, this is what's going to happen, and I love Keith dearly. Keith is an inner circle friend. He's going to say, I know Keith well enough. He's going to say, damn it, Galloway killed it. And he's going to be a little bit jealous of this. Personal question for me here. Any plans, I got to ask this question, of running for alternative offices?
Alternative offices.
Because I think you are primed for a climb politically.
You learn your lesson. I've learned my lesson, and I haven't even done a whole lot. I've tried to run for a different office before. And you learn a lot. Like a lot of times people say, well, you run the first time and lose to learn how to run, which I did. My first campaign was a loss. And then ran the second time was a win. My third time was a loss. And the last 2 times I didn't have competition. So saying it was a win, I think's a win, because you have to, if you do it the right way.
It's definitely a win.
But you never say never. You never say no. I enjoy the work. I enjoy policymaking. I enjoy being in the room where the policies are made. So I'm never going to say never to things like that. But at this time, I have no plans to do anything like that either. I'm in my 3rd year of my 2nd term.
Right.
This is when you have to start pondering what the next steps are.
Hence my question.
So who knows in the next 12 months?
Okay.
That's a perfectly appropriate question that I'm sure I'll be asked and be prepared to answer. But right now, that's where I'm at.
Ned Galloway was on fire today. He is supervisor of Albemarle County, one of them, the Rio District, and he undoubtedly exceeded expectations today.
Hey, and make sure those people give me some townhome value questions. I truly want to know the answer to that, and I think you're on it.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that I don't believe that, but if there are people with input on that, put it in the feed or send it my way, shoot me an email, something like that.
The
'cause I'm
Woody
trying to
Fitchums of
understand
the
that.
world. The
Yeah.
detached housing stock is increasing in value. We're curious
Attached.
of why. Or sorry, attached. Townhomes. and
single family attached. Yeah,
That's
I'm
right,
just
that's
curious about that.
Linda said you did a fantastic job today. Ned Galloway,
Thank you, Linda.
guys. This show is archived wherever you get your podcasting content. You can find it on Real Talk with Keith Smith. We encourage you to support the partners that make the show possible. Click the Partners tab, and it's the vetted, trusted advisors to help you get to the closing table and beyond in real estate. The I Love Seville show is up at 12:30 p.m., where we're going to highlight some of the content that Supervisor Galloway highlighted on today's show. Thank you kindly for watching. So long, everybody.